Ross Taylor couldn't see at night or when the clouds were in. Eventually, he had to see an eye specialist who would fix his eyesight. In the 2 years before the change, he still averaged more than 50 in international cricket. The top level of batting talent can basically see in the dark. That is who we are talking about in our new book, The Art of Batting. Head over and order your copy today. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community that makes content like this, head over now. Welcome to Good Areas Live. We're here on the Wagon wheel with Jarrod Kimber, the cricket podcast that answers your questions on cricket. I think that's it. I'm not even sure I've ever written an intro for this show, but if I had an intro, that would be it. If you want to ask questions and you're watching live on YouTube at the moment, the best way is via a super chat. I understand there's a game on, so there may not be a lot of super chats today. But if not, and you desperately want your question in once a week, the best way to support us is via Patreon. Put out a message. Everyone puts their questions up. No one puts their answers up. Maybe some people do put their answers up, but I only read the questions, like I will with Sam. So if you go over to Good Areas Live, Good Areas Podcast, I should say, for Patreon, you can find us over there. But Sam says, I know you've talked a lot about the history of the googly, but how much do we know about the origin of regular leg spin? From a mechanical point of view, it's less intuitive than off spin or seam bowling, so I find it hard to imagine how someone came up with it and made it repeatable. I think this is actually an easy one to explain, Sam, because you're thinking about overarm bowling. If you think about underarm bowling, leg spin is the most natural thing to do with your hand, right? So, it's very hard to do off spin bowling underarm, whereas leg spin probably makes sense. So I would assume that leg spin probably predates off spin because of the underarm. I could be wrong with this. And the reason is that cricket isn't particularly well written about. The famous story in cricket, of course, about how women taught us overarm bowling is incorrect, right? We know that. We know that there was overarm bowling before the woman who was involved. We also know that that story is like 80 years removed from when it happened, which was like a family story that was passed down, and it's clearly just not true. The dresses were wrong, the fashion was wrong, and it didn't happen. And it already happened beforehand. But it also shows you that there's a huge gap between some of the early thinkings about cricket and what was happening up until about 1770, up until about 1870, right? So there's a bit of a gap on all these things. So for instance, the sweep shot's really interesting. So I think it was for the book, I tried to find out the origin of the sweep shot, and we can't even really work out. We can work out roughly, I suppose, when it was started to be used in conversations. But the sweep shot's probably one of the oldest shots, and so no one ever really wrote it down. I think we knew about some of the other shots. We know about the first forward defense. There's a little bit written about it, but there's a lot of things that are happening in cricket that aren't actually written about. And so I would say that leg spin probably fits under that. Whereas by the time it gets to wrong, and there is a little bit more of actual reporting on these things. So it comes up very, very different from that point of view. So I would assume there is no way of actually telling you when the first leg spinner was bowled. But my guess is, just from understanding the evolution of the sport the way I do, it would have come from if you just get a cricket ball in your hand right now and underarm, that motion is really easy. Whereas off spin isn't natural. It's very hard to underarm an off spinner. And so there's heaps of things like that in cricket that are just not really talked about. Like, I don't think we know about Spofford and swing. I don't know if we really have much reporting on who the first person was that realized that if you hold the seam straight up, it will work. Now, does that just mean lots of people did it at the same time? I don't know. But that's where we are with that, with the original origin of cricket and all those sorts of things. I mean, we don't actually know why the sport is called cricket. I am working on a project because I'm pretty sure I might have worked it out. But overall, we don't know why it is called cricket. And so there's a lot of things that happened in that period. If you think about from the first laws being written, so around the 1770s, right, where they were starting to be writing them down. Even if they were all different in different regions, at least we had them written down. From the 1770s through to maybe the 1870s, we don't actually know as much as we should. And it's just, unfortunately, the way that the game went. And now, after the 1870s, we learn a lot about, obviously Grace, Spofford, Ranji, Trumper in a short period of time. The other guy who had that weird shot that I think Ranji had written about, the draw. We can even go back and see the first reverse sweeps being played, or what looks like could have been reverse sweeps. But that's where it all starts. So anything before that, we don't know as much about. Ajit said, what impressed you the most about Nepal so far in this T20 series against West Indies? Their batting, which is normally their weaker side, their bowling, which is just spoiled with spin options, or their fielding and hunger. I haven't watched a lot of it. I've been traveling the last couple of days. I followed some of it online. The thing for me with Nepal is talent, obviously not a massive issue there, but a little bit like Afghanistan, it has sort of come together in a sort of club crickety way. Or street crickety way, really, actually, not even club cricket way. And so the balance has always been a little bit off with their side. But it's the fact that Nepal and Afghanistan, and you can see this with sides a lot. It usually happens with younger teams. They get very emotional. And Nepal is a classic case of that. I've said this before, that betting on Nepal is one of the easier things in betting markets, because their fans completely warp the markets quite often. Because everyone in Nepal is so positive they're about to win, or then positive they're about to lose. And if you just keep your brain in the middle, it used to be, and I haven't bet on them a little while, it used to be that you would make money pretty consistently from them, while they were inconsistent, which is, baffling. So there's definitely an element of that, I think, when you're looking at Nepal. And the way they play their cricket is almost exactly the same. So watching them, sometimes you're just like, oh, okay, so they're in this position now. They just need to play regular cricket from here on in to win this game. And they don't. They take big chances and they keep making swings when they're front, which I suppose Afghanistan and the sort of early Bazball cricket, it's exactly the same. It's like, you don't need to take chances when you're winning, right? If you're winning, you continue to make good decisions, right? And if you go back, Nepal didn't do that. Now, I haven't watched a lot of this series, but perhaps that's some of the thing that is starting to happen, is that they are becoming more professional. They're not riding the highs and lows in the same way. And so they're actually playing cricket in a more professional, sort of structured way. But I haven't seen them, so it could be nothing. Parb says, how bad has the West Indies batting got? They recently got bowled out for 27 versus Australia in Test, and now lost the series to Nepal. Everyone's on this. I should have done much more research. If anyone half decent comes around, they choose to play T20 leagues, and the team is left with no one. Their batting's been an issue since Sawan wasn't any good, right? So we're talking about like a 20-odd year period. Sawan was the last time when they had 3 batters in the side, I think, where you're all like, these are above average talents. Now, 2 of those happen to be great players in Chandrapal and Lara. But Sawan's probably the last guy where you're like, yeah, they have 3 players here who can bat. And since Sawan's career ended, and, there are people who probably don't even remember Sawan on this, who are listening to this podcast. I mean, when would his last game have been? He played his last international 2011, 2013 in ODI cricket. So Sawan scores what? About 10,000 runs in professional cricket at an average of 40, right? Sorry, not professional cricket, in international cricket, an average of 40. So averaging 40 in Test cricket, which he'd be their best bat now, right? And averaging 42 in ODIs at a strike rate of 75, which for his era is it's not great, but it's not terrible. He would be their best bat, I think, across formats, well, across those 2 formats now. I'm not sure he would have ever been a great T20 player. And so someone really from 2013 onwards, and you could say that really Lara had retired quite a bit before that. So whenever Lara retires, from that point forward, they never have 3 good batters. Whereas if you go back, even some of the leaner periods where Kirtley and Courtney sort of carried them quite a bit, you had Lara, you had Jimmy Adams, you had Carl Hooper, fading Richie Richardson for a little while. Sawan was coming through, and wouldn't have played too much with some of those guys, but a bit with the others. So it meant that they always had 3, 4 players who could bat. And you look at it now, and that just has not been the case. And they're not replacing these players, right? So you could argue that they haven't had, since Chandrapal, that they haven't had another sort of great player, right? I think that's very, very fair and normal and everything else. But I don't think what you could argue is that they haven't, like, they're not actually having average players, right? They're not having someone who's just a good international player, right? That's all someone was in his era, a good international player, slightly above average, could make runs against pretty much every team. You knew you could rely on him. You know, in the era he played, 40 is just marginally above probably the average of a player in his era. Like, I don't think his match factor or his era factor would be huge, but you knew you were going to get runs out of him. The best batters now are Shai Hope, who's incredibly limited player in ODIs, and then you've got Craig Brathwaite, who's an incredibly limited player. Neither of them are better than someone. So they have not been creating batting talent for a very long period of time. It doesn't help when you take Hetmeyer and Puran out of it, right? But even if you put them back in it, Brathwaite is and Hope are not better than someone, right? So it's not as if, even if you go back to that other period, this has been an ongoing problem for a long time. Chandrapal played in the 90s. Someone makes his debut in about 2000. That means that for 25 years, they have struggled. And I think Chris Gale made his debut in the 90s as well, 99 maybe. But for about 25 years, they have not created averagely talented international players with the bat. Now, go to their bowling. We've had, Kemar Roach come through. We've had Jason Holder come through. Shannon Gabriel. Again, these are all above average bowlers. I could go through a bunch, right? Not to mention Sunil Narayan and Samuel Badri. Even Gudakesh Modi, I would say, is an international quality spinner without sort of any problems there. Jamel Warrican, again, right? So it's not that's really interesting to me. That we might not be seeing the great bowling attacks that they have had in the 70s and 80s, but the bowling system has not dried up. The batting has. I can't give you a great answer for that, Pav, but it's been going on for a very, very long time. Sam says, you've described Chappell and Gavaskar sometimes coming out with insights so searing you're stunned, despite a lot of dross. I'm not sure I ever called it a lot of dross, but a lot of the same thing saying over and over again. To me, this seems like Shoaib Bashir's bowling. If you accept this metaphorical premise, what bowler best sums up your writing style? I don't think I would say that Chappell and Gavaskar were like Shoaib Bashir. It would probably be more like a stock bowler who occasionally has a delivery that no one can play. That's probably more how I would see their commentary. And a lot of that comes down to producing. I think Chappelli was great when he had great producers. And also it comes down to them wanting to move with the times. Their commentary, like, I've gone back and listened to some of the stuff from Chappelli in the 90s, and I think even early Gavaskar is there as well. They were good commentators, but they're saying the same thing then with a sport that's completely changed. That's where you need to go. If you accept this metaphorical premise, what bowler best sums up your writing style? That's fascinating. What bowler best sums up my writing style? It's probably someone who bowls long spells and isn't really a strike bowler, but can go on a pattern of striking. So is that someone like, I don't know, Jimmy Anderson or Glenn McGrath? But Glenn McGrath probably strikes too much. But yeah, maybe someone like Jimmy Anderson. I mean, we need a crapper version than that, but I'm trying to think of like someone who has the ability to work people over. Yeah, maybe Jimmy Anderson's a good one because it's not quite technically correct, right? But it kind of worked for the time and place that he was in. I'm trying to think of like a shitter version of that because now it sounds like a humble brag, but I didn't mean that. But it's easier to remember famous bowls. Although you went with Shoaib Bashir. So now it feels like that I have said that Ed Chappell and Sunil Gavaskar are like Shoaib Bashir and then compared myself to Jimmy Anderson. This one got away from me very quickly. Ravine says, suppose World Test Championship final is a 5-test series and you get to decide where the matches are played. Which 5 venues? Yeah, someone asked this recently, Ravine, and I'll try and remember them, but I reckon it might have even been on a wagon wheel. I think you would have, one wicket in Australia, So is it probably like the MCG these days? God, is it that bad that the MCG's become the better place? But yeah, probably one wicket in Australia. You pick somewhere in England. Maybe the Oval makes the most sense in England. Or it'd be the Oval or Edgbaston, I think. I think you'd be picking one of those two. And I would probably want something like Chennai. I think Chennai is right. In India, maybe Joburg for the bounce, especially if you're going the MCG, because you don't need to, even though there's bounce there, it's a different kind of bounce. So maybe Joburg makes sense. So what have I got? So I need more Asian then, don't I? Because the Oval's still going to give you some assistance for spin if it's a normal wicket. I'm trying to think of a wicket that will give you a little bit of both. And then you probably want what? Gaul, I suppose, in Sri Lanka probably makes sense. Yeah. A lot of wickets around the world have changed a lot because of drainage, because of new methods and everything else, drop-in pitches. So it's not as easy a question as I think it would have been a few years ago. But yeah, I think that's what you're looking for. If you can find a wicket that will kind of help spinners and pace bowlers, and I'm struggling to think of one off the top of my head, Ravin, but there is probably a couple. There must be some in the West Indies. I think you would also go with that. And if you wanted if you didn't want to go the Oval or Edgbaston, maybe one of those sort of luminescent green sort of basin wickets perhaps would be quite interesting. And you could take Joburg out and put in Perth Stadium. I think that's a really interesting wicket at the moment. And then they don't play test matches there really much anymore, but I would have thought like the sort of Dubai wickets would have been quite interesting. But I think maybe the other way of doing it is just going like, where's some of the best cricket being played? Maybe Headingley, even though, Anyway, Ali says, Tim Wigmore has a new book out about the history of Test cricket. What a bastard. I'm not sure you got the chance to read it, but it's the same as yours, or does it cover it from a different angle? No, it's a very different kind of book than mine. He's been on the podcast talking about it. I think he's been quite honest in saying that mine is one of the reasons he wrote his. He was, very effusive about mine when it came out. I remember we had a phone call about it. And I was the opposite. I was like, no, well, you could easily write another book about Test cricket. And I think maybe that was what tickled his brain a little bit. He went off. Mine is more a novel to Test cricket, I think. I wanted to find the emotional beats of Test cricket. So it didn't really occur to me to go out and to interview people and everything. But I think I might have even told Wigmore on that thing that that's what you would do if you wanted to write a more academic, definitive book on Test cricket. Mine was never supposed to be definitive. It's called The Unauthorized Biography. So in the title, it gives you a very good clue of the way I was looking at it. I was trying to look at it from an outside perspective to show how politics and life and humanity have changed our sport and how that played out on the field, right? His is much more a definitive, almost encyclopedia of Test cricket in some ways. So very, very different. Brilliant book, but very different to my book. You could read both of them back to back, and there's obviously a little bit of overlap, but I don't think you would feel like you've just read the same story twice. There are some story beats that are similar, but very different writing styles, very different outlooks on the book and everything else. Both of those books, though, have been nominated on the long list for the William Hill Sports Book of the Year, along with Jimmy Anderson. So I was going to say both those books. No, they haven't, because my new book, it's The Art of Batting, that's been nominated, not that one. But both me and Wigmore. We've been Wigrod from the start, like Barbenheimer. It hasn't quite caught on in the media yet, but I pushed it as far as I can. Josh says, I saw a YouTube video of Viv Richards getting 3 run-outs in the 75 World Cup final. Also saw another where he dropped 3 catches. How do you rate Viv as a fielder? Yeah, I think he was a really good fielder. I don't think he was as quick as some of the other fielders that we've seen, but I think he was, so I don't think he was as quick as Ricky Ponting. Maybe he had some steps as quick as Ricky Ponting, but I don't know if he was as quick over 10 meters, right? So as a fielder, especially in those days, you really wanted to be fast in the first, 5 to 7 meters, right? And I'm not sure that Viv Richards is someone that I saw do that. My memory of Viv Richards, though, was he was brilliant at hitting the stumps. And there was a lot of West Indian cricketers that put a precedence on that I don't think the rest of the world did. I think Australia and the West Indies, for whatever reason, were much more interested in hitting the stumps than everyone else. So they produced a lot of fielders, Alan Border, Ricky Ponting, Joe Solomon, these sorts of guys. You listen to them talk about that as a thing they were trying to do. So I definitely think there was a big part of that, Josh. I don't remember Viv having great hands, though. He had better hands than, say, Martin Guptill or John C. Rhodes. So at a certain point, and we talked about this, and I think it was on the Crick Picks about great fielders. It's a really interesting one because Mark Waugh, even though he's a great athlete, is not as fast as some of these other guys. But Mark Waugh almost never fumbled. So is it better to be someone who's slightly slower, who's always going to pick the ball up cleanly, and then have the presence of mind to always be pretty close with his throws? Or is it better to be Martin Guptill, who's going to get to balls that Mark Waugh is not going to get to? And so Viv Richards maybe wasn't, I think he was a solid fielder. So I think he had solid hands without being brilliant hands. But the thing with Viv Richards is if he stops the ball, he's a very good chance of hitting the stumps. And if you go back, like especially by the late 80s, guys were just sort of hitting the ball to fielders and taking off for runs because it wasn't that often that you got direct hits. By the 90s, that had kind of died off a little bit, right? And so, yeah, I think Viv had some elite fielding skills. And I think he had some other skills that maybe weren't quite as elite. So I don't know if I'd put him in that in the top bracket. But my memory of watching him play and having looked at clips like you, Josh, is he hits the stumps an awful lot. Like sometimes when I'm looking at old footage, and I'm watching a whole game, it is noticeable how often he hits the stumps. And it's something I have noticed before. Hurt says, are there any practical things West Indies team can do to implement from looking at New Zealand to win a test or two in India starting next week? I'm still not convinced Moti being left out. I mean, Moti's just lost form, Hurts. Practical things. I think there was a confluence of a lot of different things, but one thing that they did very well is sweeping. And they completely committed to that. Now, some of that I think was because Ashwin had maybe lost the ability to drop the ball and kick it up the way that he had before. That may not be the case anymore. But I think if you're looking for practical, my memory was it, and I'm pretty sure I wrote about this during that series, that they swept them quite a lot. Obviously bowling your spinners, trying to bowl a little bit quicker, I think is something. Gareth Batty as a spinner hates that, but I do think that is something else that needs to be done. So those are probably the two most obvious ones. If anything else, I'd say is if there is a wicket that is going to seam around, I would try and bowl first on it and bowl the opposition out for 50. I think West Indies should really try and do that as well. I think most teams should try and do that, if we're being honest. I think it's a really good tactic, and it's underused. We'll be back in a couple of seconds with more of the Wagon Wheel. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community that makes content like this, head over now. Ben Duckett does not leave the ball. He goes after everything. That is his signature style. Well, actually, no. Perhaps now he is best known for Duckett's Buckets, his new hat range. I don't know if Herbert Sutcliffe sold his own hats, but I would definitely have bought them if he did. But Ben Duckett does, so you don't need to be left alone without one. Chase down your own Duckett's Buckets today. Anil says, all through the Asia Cup, I noticed Bumrah and Kuldeep fielding at point. Isn't the conventional wisdom that one of your best fielders has to be at point? Is India testing something? Well, actually, this has been happening for a little while. I think Scotland did this years ago as well. Before I was with them, for sure. So I think teams have worked out now that your better fielders are generally going to be on the rope. But also, it depends on the batter that you're going with. But I have seen other teams do this as well. So I think now teams are more likely to put their fielder there. So it isn't, I don't think it's the whole time. If I remember correctly, it's a power play thing with these sides. And so I'm not 100% sure of the full. I haven't talked to anyone in cricket about it. I might send some messages off now, Anil, but it is something I have seen other teams try. Adityan said, do you feel like England have started fixing the spin issues in T20s recently? Or have they just been playing conditions that are helpful for spin? A core of Duckett, Butler, and James Smith feels more capable playing spin. Yeah, I think if you bring Duckett in and Butler plays well, it's a huge step forward, right? I still think they have a lot of players who don't play spin well, who are going to have to play a pivotal role. But yes, I think you're right. There was a period where they just couldn't bat against spin, right? And I don't know how you do that in T20 cricket. I think it was bad selection, but also it was probably dumb luck as well. They are getting a little bit better, and I think that was one of the reasons they want to duck it in the side. And it says, how does Hawkeye calculate the ball path? Does it take into account conditions? For example, if a wicket is playing particularly conducive to swing? No. So it is literally, it is mapping out what the ball has done, and then saying from here on in, it started to move to this angle. So if we go at the logical point here, so Hawkeye isn't going to be able to work out if the ball is going to have late swing. Up until the point that it has contact or stops moving or wherever, that's the point at which they stop and they make their calculation from there for the predictive path. But they don't need to worry about if a pitch is swinging more because they can see the ball swinging, right? So they're mapping what the ball is actually doing, whether it be bounce or anything else. And so let's say a ball lands on 8 meters, right? And then it hits the batter on just above the knee roll. In front of their stump. So it hasn't bounced as much as possible. From 8 meters to that point, they can tell if what the trajectory of that ball is and whether it should have kept going up or whether it was already on its way down or staying still for a little while. They can work that out based on the fact that they have Hawkeye data for a ball landing 8 meters and hitting someone just above the knee roll over and over again. The exact same with swing. So that's what it's doing. It's using the information that it has from the ball being released, and then it's using a calculation from there to be like, okay, so a ball at this pace, bouncing here, keeping as low as this has, will generally go on at this velocity at this in this direction, and that's what they're doing. The same with swing. It's exactly the same, but with the swinging ball. Sino says, is there any player in a cricketing record list that makes you think, what the hell is he doing there? For me, it's Saha in the IPL Centurions list. I always found it funny when I was at Lords and you see Agarkas on the Lords Honour Board. I know that's not quite what you mean, but that was always one for me where I was just like, how is he on this list as a batter? I remember being taken there for the tour when I was maybe 2003. Can't remember when I did the tour of Lords. But a long time ago now, and I was just like, I think I cornered the guy and said, sorry, can you take me through this? I have missed this 100 somehow. Which I think the guy thought was quite funny. But yeah, so that's one. The one that me and Varun always hate, and it might not make as much, but when we're doing stats, quite often you have to take Stuart Broad and Shane Warne out of stats when you're looking at batters, because they made so many runs over such a long career. So you'll have like all these guys like averaging from 55 through to like 27, right? And then you'll suddenly have like these other guys averaging less than 20, and it completely ruins all the mass. And you have to be like, okay, just top 7 batters or whatever. That's one that we see all the time. So I suppose those are ones. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, Sinner. But yeah, I'm sure there would be others. The other one that used to be the case, probably isn't the case as much anymore, but if you used to look at Sri Lanka's top wicket takers, even if you just did it in Test cricket, but I think if you did it in all, like Sanat Jayasuriya was in like the top 5 for ages in both formats, which he might still be right across the board. I don't even know where he would be at the moment, but I always remember seeing that and just being like, oh my God, come on now. That's probably why Bayram put him in that one of the worst cricket decisions. Reese says, do you expect things like match factor and strike rate factor, and basically all things data analysis, becoming completely accepted by mainstream media? Do you even want it to be? I've always felt the put off with me with sports, baseball, and basketball is information overload. However, when it comes to cricket, I like it all. Yeah, I don't know if you would need era factor and match factor on TV, only because you should have more. Like era factor and match factor are really handy, but there's probably better stats that you could use with TV information if you're looking at players just in the last 10 or 15 years. Like, runs above expected average from CricViz would be probably one off the top of my head, right? Like that factors in the actual balls that you got, not just the pitch that you were on, right? So I think there's probably some others, but yeah, I do think it will come in. It's just a better way to talk about cricket, right? Like I don't think it's about overload, Reese. I think most people, once you explain these sorts of things, are like, that makes more sense than just batting average there, right? So eventually, when that becomes the conversation, I think that those sorts of things will come in. I'm not saying they will be the stats that we use or that other analysts use, but those kinds of things are putting context on it. Because isn't that the whole idea of a stat anyway? That it has context. And too often in cricket, they just don't, because the original stat doesn't make sense. Mob says, if you were putting together a charity test match to honour Susie Bates and shame and disgraceful New Zealand cricket, it's ridiculous, isn't it? How would you go about it? Go nuts and get wild with any details, including location, World 11 funding. Yeah, I think if you're doing it, maybe the best way of doing it is like that sort of some of those old-fashioned matches, which would be Asia versus rest of the world or Australia versus rest of the world. And you would put it on. I don't know how you go to the ICC. So people have talked about this. I think it was in our Discord chat, and I think Mob, you obviously involved, but people are talking about Patreon, like doing a Kickstarter. I don't know if there's enough time to get it ready, but yeah, I think I would make it I think that would be great for women's cricket if we just had the best 24 test players in the world all playing together. And it doesn't have to be in honor of Susie Bates, but obviously she would get one of the spots as well. I think that's a fair and useful thing to do. And then start a Kickstarter and get a couple of $100,000 and see how you go there. You'd probably be, this is probably something for a company like DP World, Emirates. I'm trying to think of some of the other sort of major cricket sponsors. Like, it's expensive, but isn't it showing that you actually want to be part of the game and are not just trying to, get your logo out there, right? Like, I think it could be a really, really cool thing. So maybe that's what you would have to do rather than Kickstarter. You just go to a sponsor and be like, let's do this, and then go to the ICC with a sponsor who they are used to working with and say, let's do it, right? Let's do Asia versus rest of the world. I think that's the one that probably makes the most sense. But if that wasn't strong enough, I don't know. There's another way of doing it, I'm sure. Or you call it the Test All-Stars. And, you get a captain on either side and you do a draft. Maybe that works better. I definitely watch that. I've created a thing I would watch, basically in my career. Sashimi says, I'm originally from Arunachal Pradesh. My parents moved to the UK and I fell in love with cricket due to growing up with the Indian community here. But it's very sad that there's almost zero representation, not just my state, but the entire northeastern cricket. What's the way for the BCCI to develop cricket out? I understand cricket isn't the second or third most popular sport, but filling northeast teams with professionals from other states hasn't yielded results. All we get are embarrassing scorecards like 800 runs, someone all out for 7. Yeah, I think probably what you need, especially, it's a really interesting point, and I've talked about this before, that I actually don't think India is fully tapped into all their talent yet. Which I've told this to other cricket boards, and the shocked look on their face. But they haven't, because we know that the whole country really isn't involved. I think it probably needs a breakout player. I think it probably needs a breakout player to come through. This is the way I look at it. What happens in sport is, the NBA is fascinating for this. Of a player will come out of one country, and then the NBA go back to check if there are other players there, right? But what they don't always do is go and look for players from places where they haven't had players before. Which I understand the reasoning. Why would you go and have a look there if you're not sure that these players are going to give you any advanced money or or forward your team, or however you want to look at it, right? But it also doesn't really make sense. Like, I don't think Larry Markkinen is the first 7-footer from Finland who has a good shooting stroke, right? And now we know that maybe a guy's going to go in the draft in the next. And Finland isn't like it isn't like some of the Baltic states, right? It isn't like famous for basketball the way that some other European places are. But now people are going to look in Finland more, and we know that maybe our top draft pick is going to come again. And it's the same with Australia. Like, I grew up in Australia in the 80s. We knew that there were basketballers that had NBA talent, right? Like, we watched the NBA and we could watch our local basketball. But until those players started going off and having success, no one looked to Australia. And then since then, we've had 2 number 1 picks in the men's basketball, 1 in the women's. Another one was Dante Exum was like a 5th pick. Like, it's changed completely because people now look to Australia for basketball talent. And so I think that a similar thing has to kind of happen based on what I know about sport. My argument would be there's probably already talented enough cricketers there. Maybe the structure isn't right, or everything else. Maybe there's another way of developing cricket there, Sashimi. But maybe it has to be franchise based. I don't have a good answer for you. But I think once you can prove that there's any kind of talent there, people generally go, well, hello. Have a look at Afghanistan. It's a really good example of somewhere like that. Of like they weren't taken particularly seriously. Maybe their fast bowlers a little bit. Once Rashid Khan comes out, the conversations in cricket change so dramatically about Afghanistan. Saurabh says, I remember India saying they can't play Kuldeep and Chahal together due to team composition. But how do you then play Varun and Kuldeep together? Can you make it make sense? So one of the reasons is that Varun can bowl in the death and he can bowl up front. So you can bowl in the power play with him and you can bowl at the death, which means you can stretch your overs out. So straight away, he's not competing for overs in the middle with Kuldeep. The other thing is, as good as Chahal was, at one stage, Varun Chakravarti was the best bowler in T20 cricket, right? Like, you know, depending on what Bumrah's form or fitness was at any one time, you could make a claim that either of those was the best T20 bowler in the world. That's not the same as Chahal. He's never had that kind of ability or presence. And so I think you then have that. And on top of that, with Kuldeep, you then have a left-arm wrist spinner, so you have massive natural advantages. And he's also a better bowler than Chahal, right? But a lot of it is also then to do with whether Hardik was fit at any one time and where they were playing. They can't really fit Kuldeep and Varun Chakravarti in the side everywhere and outside of Asia. In Asia, I think it makes a lot more sense. So I think there's, you know, a few different reasons for that. Ian says, do you know much about Andy Brassington, Gloucester's keeper in the 70s and 80s? Jack Russell credits him with the influence that made him such a great keeper and says that Brassington coached him himself into redundancy by helping Jack so much. No, I don't know all that much about him at all. I know his name and I know it. I was talking, I think when I wrote my big piece about wicketkeeping, someone brought him up. I think there was that period probably in the 60s, 70s, and 80s where that's probably the last period where we've had an abundance of great wicket keepers. But also what comes out of that period is better wicket keeping coaching, right? And I think that Ian Healy and Rod Marsh, in different ways, probably played a big part in how wicket keeping techniques sort of changed. Jack Russell was probably one of the last great specialists. Obviously, you still get Prasanna J. Wardner after that, but there aren't that many great specialist wicket keepers after that point. And so from there on in, I think there's more a degradation of the art because of batting, right? But up until that point, so there's probably a lot of Brassingtons out there, but then it's about how good a coach you can be as well. And it sounds like he was pretty good. You tell a story here about Brassington could keep up the stumps to Mike Proctor. I mean, I've said this before. Darren Berry kept up the stumps to Paul Rifle. And I would have thought that Proctor would have been more difficult to do that too. But both of those guys with their, the way that they bowled, I don't think are particularly easy to keep up to the stumps to, despite the fact, and without even looking at the fact that they're quick as well. That's when you know that someone's a great technician. I think that's probably the thing I look at the most now with modern wicket keepers is how they go about keeping up to the stumps to pace. Because that's the next big innovation and might be the T20 thing of the future, right? Was it Sampson who missed a run out recently because he was standing too back? Not a run out. That was it. I'm trying to think what game it was. But you can the faster bowlers get, the harder it is to keep up the stumps, but also the harder it is to bowl dot balls because the wicketkeeper's so far back now. PJ says at one stage Evan Lewis was looking like becoming the next Chris Gale. 33 years of age, has he reached his full potential already? Could he technically improve any deficiency that he might have? For instance, Gale and Lewis both strike at 144, but Gale averaged 36 and Lewis is sub 30. Sub 100, sub 30. Everyone who's ever worked with Evan Lewis has always suggested that there is something missing from him psychologically to take him to the level that everyone thinks he should have got to. I don't want to be the person who piles on because I have never worked with him and I have no relationship with him and I loved him as a player. I think he had some technical deficiencies that someone like Gale didn't have. I don't think he's as sound technically. I don't know how much. I wonder if he's one of the players that might have been a lot better off if he played more first-class cricket. Let's just see where we are with his first-class cricket. Yeah, he played 22 matches and made 100. I think he would have been a better player if he played more first-class cricket, and that would have helped him in T20 cricket. Psychologically, I've always told the same story about Evin Lewis, that I saw him get hit in the nets one day, and I was like really worried because it looked really bad. And I noticed that not a single teammate or not a single coach came over to check on him. And so I asked around afterwards, and they were like, he does that every nets. He's always complaining that he's getting hit. And, you know, Johnny Bairstow does that a little bit too. Johnny Bairstow's always like on the verge of death, and then 2 seconds later is fine. But it was really noticeable to me that no one seemed to care. I just think that there was always an issue with Evin Lewis. And I'm not sure, I don't want to say, like, when I say he's psychologically not up to it, what I mean is I don't think people thought he had the ability to become a day in, day out professional. And I think that's always been the mark against him. And as I said, I don't know if that's true or false or whatever, but he should have been in his prime in the last 6 years, and we haven't seen it. So I think people have worked out how to bowl to him a little bit better, and I don't think he ever became the technical batter that he should have become. And I also don't think he became the great professional that he needed to become. I'd be fascinated to know. I don't think he talks that much, and he hasn't given that many interviews. It'd be fascinating to know what he thinks as well. And it's hard to ask him now, but maybe when he retires, that's the sort of conversation he can have. Ramesh says, why have we not seen left-arm mystery bowlers of the likes of Varun Majib, right-arm offies? Okay, so I've written about this and talked about this quite a bit, Ramesh. It's basically because a left-arm finger spinner has such a massive advantage. Their ability to take the ball away from right-handers and to pitch the ball on the stumps and spin it away or go straight and give themselves bowled, LBW, and caught, right, against 66% of batters means that they don't develop as much. They have such a natural advantage all the way through their career. Whereas even if you're a great off spinner, say, someone's going to be able, the vast majority of players won't be that terrified against an off spinner and will be able to handle the angle and the spin and everything else. And so you're constantly trying to stay ahead. And I talked to some coaches about this because they asked me about it because I think they'd heard me on a podcast. They sort of cornered me at the ground once. And I said, I think what happens is if you're a left arm finger spinner and you're really, really good, you fly through this the system and you continue to be really, really good. And then by the time you get to 25, 26, 27, you realize that you're a little bit limited, but you still have this incredible talent. So multi-panesars like the S-tier version of what I'm talking about, right? When you're an off spinner, you're competing with more people who are right-armed anyway. It's easier to hit you, especially for specifically for right-handers, which is the vast majority of cricketers. And at the lower level, there's more right-handers than there are left-handers, even more so than we see at an international and franchise level. That you're constantly trying to stay ahead of the game and you're looking for an advantage. The left-handers already have that advantage. So I think it's the same reason why left-arm pace bowlers don't swing the ball both directions and right-arm pace bowlers can. I think it's exactly the same thing. And I think it's because the thing that works for you is so good. There really isn't a reason to add all these different bows. Whereas if you're a right-arm bowler, I think you're constantly having to evolve just to stand out amongst the other right-arm bowlers. So I would say if you looked at it from talent perspective, forget everything else, that the average right-arm bowler who might, let's say they average 30 in Test cricket, and you have a left-arm bowler who averages 30 in Test cricket. I'll try and get my hands the same. If they both average 30, I think you would be in a situation there where there would be more talent with a right-arm bowler than the left-arm bowler 99 times out of 100. Not always the case. There may be some outliers, and maybe it's 95 times out of 100. So to be a Test bowler who averages 30 with right arm, I think you have to be just, phenomenal player and everything else. To be a left armer, you might just be that you have one good delivery or that you're reasonably fast and you can swing it a bit. So I think it's a huge difference between the two skill sets. And there's a huge advantage to left-handers. Some of that is changing and blah, blah. But throughout the history of the game, and because by the time you get to professional level, that's when it actually becomes more important for a left armer to be able to bowl to left-handers. It's not as important when they're playing club cricket. Rob says, what are the differences between a great, good, and a poor umpire? I'm presuming it's more than just decision-making, although that's the primary responsibility. It's that they understand why they're giving each decision. So if you're at home and it's you or me, and I'm trying to train myself out of this, but most of my life I've been like this. I'm like, that's out, that's not out, right? Why is that out or not out, right? And if you talk to some umpires, they don't always have a good answer for that, even professional umpires. once they get to a point where they can instantly say, that's not out because ABC, and not even just ABC, right? Unless there is only one reason. That's very hard. And then they need consistency within their thinking. So I think that's a huge part of it. As far as on-field stuff, it's understanding that you're dealing with humans, right? And also understanding that players are, there is a bit of, I think being an umpire is a little bit like being a substitute teacher, right? So if you let them get away with stuff, they will just continue to get away with stuff. So I'm not saying you have to act like a cop or anything, or like, a violent teacher or angry or anything, but you need to let them know that you're in charge, right? But also that you have a dialogue with everyone. So I think communication, leadership, and then consistency and understanding why you're making each decision. Aravin says, in the article that Fernando wrote about Nasanka recently, there's a small tidbit about how Nasanka called a physio in the middle of his innings as he was having issues with his back, but later revealed he'd only done that as he was tired and wanted a breather. While I applaud the gamesmanship wholeheartedly, I'm curious as to how little traction this throwaway comment gained in the wider media. Well, it's a piece on Sri Lanka, that's why. Would the same thing for a player from a big three nation? No, if that would have been any of the big three teams or a Pakistani player, we would know about it a bit. I read that article and I don't even remember that, but that's probably just more on myself. Look, we know players do that all the time, right? Isn't it the classic Muhammad Ali thing when he got knocked down by Henry someone? I should know that one. When he got knocked out by him, and his trainer came over and saw a slightly loose thread on his glove and just pulled it. Said, "Oh, sorry, his glove." Like, this is what athletes do. They look for any advantage that they can get, right? We've seen that with Gulbuddin Naib's hamstring. We saw that with India in that same World Cup. We've seen it with Australian players, West Indies players, and everything. That's what players are doing. They're looking for those little moments to keep themselves ahead of the game. But yeah, you're right. If it was anyone from one of the sort of foremost discussed nations, maybe that's the best way of putting it, it would have been talked about a lot more. Karen said, how transparent and accountable is the ICC's current revenue sharing model? To what extent is it designed to expand cricket's global expansion versus the current state of the big three? No, it's pretty much there for the big three. I haven't looked at it recently, so I don't know what numbers and information they had up. I think we know the percentages, though. I don't know if that's them being completely, like, that might have been something that we all heard about because it was leaked. I can't, but I think they might have released that themselves. But yeah, no, it is not set up for global cricket. The ICC is not set up for global cricket. It's not, has not been that case for a long time. Abhishek says, when I watched Virat live in 2016 IPL, I noticed after shots that didn't reach the boundary, he would smack his own pads with a bat and talk to himself like he knew it should have been for. Do you recall any other batters who had those kinds of self-punishing quirks at the crease? Yeah, that's a very common thing, Abhishek. This is to get back to the Nasanka question, this is the sort of thing. I had a friend once who knows a lot about cricket, actually, who said to me, if you look at Virat Kohli, when he makes runs, he quite often hits an on drive early on. He said, is that something? And I said, why do you think you've noticed that on Virat Kohli? And I've had people say the same thing about Sachin, maybe Steve Smith, Ponting. I was like, well, A, you see more of them play, right? And B, you are drawn to them, right? You're drawn to watching these players. This is a very normal thing, Abhishek. Yeah, who was it? Is it KP who used to swear quite every time he thought he should have hit a four and he didn't? He would be really, really frustrated. So yeah, it's a very, very normal thing to have that for a player. Not everyone hits the pads, and one of the reasons not everyone hits the pads is it, depending on the kind of pads you have, it can break them a little bit, make them soft, and then if you hit on the pads later, it can cause an issue. I say that I've been hitting my own pads for years, but yeah, I do this. So yeah, it's a very common thing. In T20s, how do you evaluate when a player clearly over or underperforms the role they were picked? For instance, in this Asia Cup, Abhishek massively outperformed expectations as a power play hitter, while someone like Dubé barely got used. Should analysis focus on what they did, on whether they filled the role they were selected for? Yeah, you're always looking on whether they filled the role they were selected for. Shivam Dubé, at his last game, went over and above with bowling and with batting. Probably, it's not really the reason he was picked in that side, is it? So no, you're looking. That's what you have to do. Did they come in the right situation? Is there? Yeah, I think it was it the Dinesh Karthik one in the World Cup a couple of years ago that I've talked about before. It's like if you look at what happened, I think you can say, well, that's something that will happen to a player who bats in that position sometimes. You just have to understand that and roll with it and handle it. Sinoi says, hope you enjoyed the recently concluded 3-match series between India and Pakistan. Clearly, this model shows that having warm-up games against local first-class teams is logistically feasible. Why didn't all the boards crave the suggestion of warm-up games before test series? Yeah, warm-up games are basically gone, right? I think the teams that can afford it will just take A teams out now, which is probably better practice anyway, because you can literally stack the team how you want it to go up against yours. Ajit said, very random, but wanted to ask about my favorite player. How would you rank judge a player like Dilshan over 10,000 runs in ODIs, average more than 40s in Test cricket, would even open the bowling when required, gun fielder, and invented a shot that was ludicrous? I think he's a very, very good player. I was thinking about this recently. We might do a piece on this of players whose Q rating just disappears after they retire. I think Dilshan's a really good example of that. I think he's a difficult character and was not loved by everyone within the game. Wasn't ever going to become a commentator or a coach from what I know of him. And also his career is a bit weird when you look at it, Ajay, if I'm not mistaken, because I think we were looking at him. He doesn't play the same role for very long. So, comparing to some other players who get remembered as the thing they did, I think Dilshan moved around a little bit. I'm trying to remember if he even opened all the time in one-day cricket, but maybe he did. But I think even within that, he maybe wasn't always remembered in the same way. I think he was obviously a well above average player. He would go down as a Sri Lankan great, not a worldwide great. I think it's probably fair, but an innovator and I think the way he thought about cricket was very different to other people. And a lot of the things he did are more normal now, right? Satchmo says, how many umpires has Australia produced that were as good as Dickie Bird? How good was Dickie Bird, Satchmo? I think there's actually a very good answer for this. And the answer is that umpires in England were professional and umpires in the rest of the world were not. If England was bad at umpiring, like they were at cricket at times, you would have to ask the question of how. And if you think about it, when the players when Australia and the West Indies start to overcome professionalism or come up with their own professionalism or, whatever, they take over and England falls way behind, right? That doesn't happen with the umpires. So the umpires in those countries don't professionalize. They keep being amateur. So I think that when you go back and you have a look at it, I think that's one of the big things. So Dickie Bird was probably umpiring, 30 to 35 games a year of professional cricket. How long would it take for another umpire in another country to do that? Would they have ever done that? So, I think Dickie Bird was a good umpire by all reports. I don't know if he was great. I think he was very good at understanding players and because he was a player himself and a struggling player. So I think he understood that mindset and everything else. I think he had a personality that diffused a lot of issues within the game. So I think he was good. Decision-making, I've heard mixed reports on his decision-making. But he would have umpired... I don't know how many games he umpired, but he would have umpired 3 times as much as the nearest Australian would be my guess. So, there's no reason why English umpires should have been better than umpires from around the rest of the world, right? They're not better. There's nothing within that. It has to be a system. Or lack of a system. Sam says, there seems to have been a lot more Asia Cup coverage this year. Is that due to the expanded team, Robbie Shine, Varun, etc., or a slight lull in other cricket? Yeah, we hadn't really covered it before. It's much easier for us to cover T20 tournaments than one-day tournaments. I think we're going to struggle with the Women's World Cup just because it's hard to find people who have 9 hours free, right? So T20 tournaments is a big difference. We were expecting a sponsor, so we also pivoted to expecting a sponsor that did not come through. So we didn't want to be in a situation where we weren't covering the tournament and then we had to. It was a good time zone for a lot of us. Again, another thing that matters. We had planned a bunch of features and we suddenly looked at those features and went, it doesn't make a lot of sense to release those features during the Asian Cup. And once we came up with the ideas of the coverage, I think that was fine. But also the expanded team is a part of it, as in we have a bigger team now than we probably would have for most other times during the Asia Cup, right? Cheyenne and Varun weren't doing podcasts a year ago, right? So for a lot of it, it was Bayram, Estelle, myself. And if 2 of us were busy, it was really hard to do anything. So yeah, some of it is just dumb luck. We didn't go massive with it. We did what, 2 features a week, which is what we would have done if there was no Asia Cup on. The big difference was the third innings, and since we've sort of come up with that third innings as a concept, right? You know, analysis, but straight after a game, but without the visuals. You know, because before we were doing the, and we'll still do some of the scoreboards again. The scoreboard isn't dead, but the scoreboard takes a lot of work, so it's really hard to do what we were doing. So some of it is just we've changed our model, I think, and Asia Cup was probably a perfect thing for that. We got Sorab as well. Like, we've got so many extra people now. Ali says, from broadcaster's point of view, is it an issue when a team pulls petty boycotting antics? No trophy photos, no post-match ceremonies, no interviews, etc. Or is it just bad sportsmanship that only cricket fans, purists care about? No, I think a lot of people, I can tell you this. I got some messages from some people who are very pro-Indian, who were like the sort of people who were very happy if India would have not played in this tournament, who were furious at the trophy stuff. We're talking about people within the game, just because they're like, well, don't play and then not take the trophy. Like, what? Like that. What is even the point of that? So no, I think there were a few things. You know, it's the same with Pakistan as well. People are professionals, right? And they're annoyed when they're not treated like professionals. And some of the stuff that was done by India and Pakistan in this tournament was not professional, right? And caused issues, right? We talked about the Andy Pycroft thing, you know. It's a fascinating one, right? Of like all these sorts of random things that didn't need to happen. So within the game, people are always quite upset when there's a lack of professionalism. Like if a player doesn't come for an interview, or a player purposely gives a bad interview. Those sorts of things are actually quite often talked about within cricket. Josh says, many of the top 50 batters in the art of batting are also great fielders. Which test pace bowlers have been the best fielders? 200 wickets, sub 28 average. Bolt has a good highlight reel. Garner and the Gully. Yeah, those are 2 really good ones. I think Jimmy Addison was a really good fielder. I think Glenn McGrath was a great outfielder. Both of them, obviously, Flintoff. I don't know all the bowling averages here. Flintoff, both of those might be slightly above. Pollock was a really good slip fielder. Terry Alderman was a really good slip fielder. You probably got some older guys who were good sort of outfielders as well, who maybe weren't as needed. But those are the ones off the top of the head. But part of it is that there are probably some guys who could have been better fielders who just spent all their life at mid-off, mid-on, and fine leg or third, right? And so maybe they didn't even develop, or maybe we just don't remember them as much because in those positions you don't have the impact. Like, I don't think Glenn McGrath would have been remembered as a great fielder had it not been for the white ball era, right? Like a lot of his really good fielding on the boundary is that rocket arm, right? You know, guys like him and John Embry. Like John Embry had this incredible arm, but it wasn't talked about as much because a lot of John Embry's cricket was in red ball cricket. Whereas if John Embry was playing now, that arm would be talked about because it's a cannon, right? And so there are probably lots of sort of John Embry type cricketers out there that we have forgotten about. There's a couple of, there's a New Zealand spinner who I think was a good slip fielder, obviously Swan and Warne as well, off the top of my head. Oh, Ashley Giles, again, a very good fielder, right? Hurt says, I love how you managed to spin a single day's cricket notes into a Substack post. A good areas feature and a footmarks episode and more. What other commentator or analyst note-taking or working style do you find especially productive or interesting? I don't take that many notes, Hertz, anymore. I did for a long time in my life. I was, you know, if you do the sports writing course, you know, I talk about it a lot. A lot of it now is not. So I'm not really spinning a day's notes into a Substack post. I'm really looking for a post, a hook. And then I'm taking notes for that. So it doesn't work the way you think it does. It works the other way for me. But as I said, at certain times in my life, I definitely did that. Which other commentator, analyst, note-taking? The guys who do ball-by-ball commentary, specifically on radio, their notes are incredible. You can talk to John Norman during something, and if he's got the notebook in front of him, he can find exactly the information he needs from a long way back. Neil Manthorpe does that. Steve Harmison and Darren Goff are 2 guys I've worked with who are very good at taking notes specifically. A working style. I think people like me and Sid Monga are quite similar. So probably Sid is one that I look at just for his ability, again, to find the thing that is interesting to him and make it interesting to the world. I think that's a big part of it. You know, George Dobell I've sat next to a lot. His ability to completely take in the angles and the arts and the narrative of the game, while also having 23 meetings during the game, having phone calls from county players and all sorts of things happening around him. It's just a phenomenal thing, the way his brain works. So that's probably another one that I've noticed quite a bit. Yeah, those are probably the main ones. Anyone who can do commentary and write a piece, you know, sort of Jeff Lemon and Barrett, I suppose, would be another one. And I mean a real piece, not like just a belted out piece, but a real piece, I think, because that's really hard. You're really tired at the end of the day because you've already done a full job and you're literally doing another one. Didion said, you've always made fun of the ICC's regulations or not bringing politics into cricket. But in all the unpleasantness that's followed the India-Pakistan spat in Asia cricket, the difference between people towing the line once in a while versus totally not caring about it at all. The ICC has a regulation that says you can't bring politics into cricket and has about 6 boards who have direct links between governments and boards. Adityan. As I said, you can't, as the ICC have shown in the last couple of weeks, you can't actually stop politics from coming into cricket. You've got to put regulations in if you're a league or an organisation or everything else, but people are still going to do it. Reese says, with the strong bottom hand batters, do they always have a strong hold on the bat with that hand? And it's about when it moves through the ball, or do they have a loose grip? No, I don't think. I think you can have even if you're not a strong bottom hand batter, you're probably still holding the bat. You could still be holding the bat really hard with your bottom hand. So that's probably a different thing. But I think you're probably also right in saying that most people who are bottom hand batters are more likely to hold the bat hard with their bottom hand. I think that possibly makes a little bit more sense. I find it fascinating to think of a technical reason, given I've grown up in England on rubbish pitches and I've almost never played a shot with any sort of bottom hand involved. So I think that, so I use a lot of bottom hand when I play spin, right? And I always have, and I'm not sure why. Whereas against pace bowlers, I don't notice it, but I can feel my hand gripping against the spinner almost every time. And it's generally when I'm going to play the sweep or the slog sweep, right? And so I would say that at that stage, if you think about the way those shots are played, you probably are more likely to use your dominant hand. So yeah, I do think there is a grip. There is an element of you probably gripping tighter. Whereas I'm not very bottom hand dependent at all against pace bowling, and it's very rare for me to even notice my bottom hand. Whereas I always notice it against when I'm facing pace, I should say. Whereas I always notice it against spin. Mob says, is Sophie Devine the greatest all-rounder New Zealand have ever produced? I like Mob puts in Cairns, Hadley, Stokes, and Vittori. I'm trying to think of how she directly compares. Just in terms of numbers, what is it? 23 batting average. Oh, that's in the 100. I don't care about the 100. Whoops. ODIs 31 and 35 with the ball. Yeah, I don't think there's anything in there that suggests she's better. I think Chris Cairns is the most rounded of those. Vittori probably maybe had the better career. I'm not sure, all things considered, maybe because of the length of it. Hadley's just an all-rounder. So I would say that Cairns is one of the more... I would say that you would pick Cairns over Devine in that conversation. I'd have to go through Vittori and Devine a little bit more. Sashimi says, could Punjab beat an IPL side? They have... Oh, okay. Just the players I know. Oh, okay. So that's the actual Punjab side. I'm not going to go through all the players. Look, based on the list that you've put in front of me, no. Not that those aren't very good cricketers. But my worry is those are the big name players. You know, IPL side's going to put 4 international players in as well. So based on that, no. But if you added 4 international players to Punjab, then yes, I think you would. PJ says, in the IRT20 in the UAE, just announced that in addition to a minimum of 4 UAE players and 2 associates, each squad member must have 1 Kuwaiti and Saudi player. Is this a geopolitical goodwill gesture or something to do with the Saudi slam money? I would assume it's to do with money. Just off the top of my head, I would assume it's to do with money. But I like it. You know, the more associate players that we can get in. I think I've watched some Kuwaiti cricket. They've got some good cricketers there. I don't think I've seen the Saudi team play as much, but I've certainly seen Kuwaiti play a few times. There's a decent associate team building up over there. Rob says, with Dickie Bird's passing and the Pycroft gate, what is the relationship like between umpires, match referees, and the players? They're all traveling around together and presumably interacting off the field. So I wonder how negative interactions on the field must impact that. Yeah, they're pretty close still. There's always been an age differential, right? But the players who usually get on best with umpires are the players who drink in the hotel bar, or the players who are gregarious and will go up and talk to them in the restaurants, right? They're quite often in the same restaurants or bars. So if you're good at that, you do that. And I've always found in cricket and in life, really, that you can kind of overcome any sorts of issues with something as simple as a conversation. It's why it's just one of the reasons we need more women in cricket, because they're just better at facilitating those sorts of things. Karen says, given the uneven flow of money in world cricket, what does the financial future realistically look like for associate nations? It's how you can build money at home, right? The ICC isn't going to be able to help that. So every cricket board in the world should be looking at how do we come up with a sustainable business model at home, because we can't rely on the ICC or major tournaments going ahead. I think there's no way around that from what I can tell. Let us take some super chats and then I better head off. Somebody says, West Indies batting poor even in domestic cricket. Is it strong bowls or bad pitches? It's bad pitches. It's bad pitches. Have a look at some of you can see some of these games, they're domestic games. Me and my friends have watched some of them when they've been, we've all been betting together. We're like, this is just horrendous. Like, I remember there was a game and I said, one team made like 280. And I said, well, the other team can't make 280 because Rakeem Cornwall was playing. And I was like, he will be unplayable on this wicket. And too often when you're watching domestic West Indies cricket, that's what you see. Somebody says, West Indies likely to lose 2-0 versus India, but what is a good result? Maybe 35 wickets overall. What's a good result is just them staying in some of the contests, right? They've got to stay in some of those contests. We saw them against Australia at times sort of do that. I thought, they stayed in the contest a little bit and then it fell down. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Expected runs. And I think that's what it is. It's staying in the contest as much as they can. And if they can't do that, then they're going to struggle. And that's how these things work. Sorry, there's a super chat here from Aditya, but I can't see any message. Sorry, mate. Sorab says, now that India has won almost all their matches that matter bar in the 223 final, what has really worked for them? Has this run of golden form ever happened before with other teams? Yeah, what's happened with Australia quite a few times. West Indies, I suppose, as well. What has happened for them? They underperformed in some of those tournaments and they've freed themselves up to play a form of cricket that other people can't play. Before, they were playing everyone else's form of cricket. And it wasn't even suiting, I would suggest, their main talents. They weren't trying to take wickets. They had wicket takers available to them. They weren't trying to outscore teams. They had players who could outscore teams. 2015 World Cup, I said that India could be the first team to score 500 in an ODI. It's only recently that they've started playing cricket that has shown that they can do that. So why have all that talent and then try and get past scores all the time? Jack says, Kane Winston probably ranks last amongst the Fab Four. He does in the art of batting. He doesn't have a good record against the Rich Three and South Africa. How much of that is down to him batting predominantly number 3 compared to the others? Maybe slightly. He's also had a lot of his success at number 3. So I think it's great he bats at number 3. I wish all the best batters would, but obviously that's never going to happen anymore. Yeah, but I don't think the reason he hasn't made runs against the 4 best bowling attacks is because he's batted at 3. It may have made it harder, but that should be a drop-off of like 5 to 7 runs. It's not a drop-off of 5 to 7 runs in his record. It's way more than that. Lentil says, has ever been a more politically charged final, a charged game than this final ever? Is it good or bad for cricket? Thoughts on the trophy ceremony? Moshin Naqvi, ego. Is it good or bad for cricket? Look, at the moment, India-Pakistan games fund a lot of world cricket. So the India fans still caring about it is the main driver for that. They felt like they still cared for it. Obviously, a lot of us would like all the bullshit to disappear. But if you, from a financial point of view, them being on this kind of edge probably helps cricket, really, right? As long as they keep playing each other. And if they're going to play each other in this tournament, it feels like they're going to play each other in all of them. Jack Jess says, if you're a coach and your skipper says the team isn't a rival at all, how would you react? Would you face palm, be angry, or have a word or something else? No, it wouldn't bother me at all. I had this fight with a bunch of English people when years ago Colin Graves said something about the West Indies side, and like, yeah, it wouldn't bother me at all. We want our players to be honest. Vibor says, if we sent a best uncapped Indian team for the IPL to the Asia Cup, how do you think they would have performed? They would have won it as well. Well, I mean, they might not have beaten India, but they would have been pretty close. I think we talked about that before. I think the seam bowling was probably the bigger issue. I think they would have been able to cover the spin better, but the second seam bowling was not as good. Once you're picking your second squad, batting would be fine, spin bowling would be fine. Yeah, maybe it wouldn't win it. Maybe Sri Lanka's so what happened? Sri Lanka didn't make back the final. Maybe you can make that argument. But yeah, I would have thought they would have been pretty close. All right, that's me done here on the Wagon Wheel. There's probably live shows happening somewhere else right now as well. I don't know if we're going to be able to do the third innings for the one days. We're going to, for the Women's World Cup, we're going to try and do as many as we can. But it's, as I said, it's just not quite as easy to do as it is for a T20 tournament. I think if this was a T20 tournament, we would have been able to pull it off. But we'll do a little bit. Estelle's doing some work. Sian's doing some work as well on the Women's World Cup. So find their work and support them, even when it's not on good areas. And we'll be back again very soon for more of these kinds of shenanigans and other shenanigans. As much shenanigans as we can fit in. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community that makes content like this, head over now.